So independent dance, its official history is talked about as about 20 years ago that it started, though actually there was an independent dance before that. The original independent dance, we used to just have £2,000 a year from the Gulbenkian Foundation, and that paid for a flyer. And then we had half a dozen weekend or day workshops over a year that we made a flyer for, and we did bring some people from abroad, but workshops themselves had to pay for themselves, and the person who would curate and administrate the workshops, in a way you would, that looked after your own training in a way, your reward was got to do all these things. But I remember all this because I, for a year, looked after that version of independent dance. And I, at that time, was just starting out in my career as a dancer. And it was Laurie Booth who had been one of the people behind this original independent dance thing around Tuffnells and all. And he said to me, do you want to organise your own training for a year, and asked me to take over running this thing, which I did for a year, way back when. But a little while after that, Jill Clark started independent dance as we know it now. I think she must have been handed it over in one of these ways, and then she reinvented it to also include morning class. So morning professional class became the first iteration of this new independent dance, and there hadn't been open professional class for contemporary dancers really in London before that. You could occasionally do a kind of class at somewhere like Pineapple. That was quite expensive, and there were membership studios. So this was kind of a new idea of an open daily contemporary professional class. And in particular, Jill was programming artists who were perhaps informed by Semitic practices, who had more deep anatomical knowledge or interest, and all this was quite new at that time. At first it didn't have a permanent home. I remember doing independent dance classes at Jubilee Hall in Covent Garden, and then at the Holborn Centre, and then at the German studios, and then eventually independent dance 10 years ago moved into the Siobhan Davis studios when they opened. So Siobhan Davis Dance and independent dance moved into Siobhan Davis studios together, and part of the funding for that building, lottery funding, was around those two organisations coming into that building together. It's Siobhan Davis Dance's building, it's not independent dance's building, so we hire space. But the organisations very much are kind of sister organisations in some ways, which I'll talk about more about later. So this was Jill's version of independent dance, and very shortly afterwards she was joined by Fiona Milward, and so they co-directed independent dance until Jill's death in 2010, at which point Fiona felt very much that she couldn't do it all on her own. So I was one of the people that came in to look after some specific projects that Jill had led on. Because by this time, in 2010, independent dance had grown from being morning class to being morning class, weekends workshops, a 3-week winter festival of international workshops, a performance festival every second year at Easter, a series of talks every autumn, movement and meaning projects with people from other disciplines and neuroscientists and anthropologists and philosophers. It had become this much bigger entity. It was running an NA in partnership with Trinity and Auburn. So independent dance had become this much bigger thing, and Fiona felt she couldn't do that on her own. Her particular interest had always been in classes and workshops and some of the discussions and MA and those sorts of projects she wanted other people to take on. So Frank Bock and I came in at that point, kind of on a consultancy basis to support this work in a kind of transition moment just after Jill Clark died. And Jill Clark, the MA Creative Practice, which we'll talk more about later, had just started when Jill died, and she had run for 1 year. And Jill had known she was going to die for quite a long time, so all the time when she was writing the MA Creative Practice and negotiating that with Trinity Laban, she'd involved me from the very beginning. So I've been involved in all the stages of writing the programme, and I think it was that she always wanted to have someone else who'd been involved from the beginning who could take it over when she died. So she kind of choreographed its continuance, as it were, and that's what happened. So I'd already been teaching on it when she was alive, so I'd already been involved in it. So yeah, so at that point there was a bit of transition after Jill died. Frank and I came in as consultants on particular strands of the programme. Teresa Beattie, who's a very experienced dance expert, consultant, manager, person in London, did some consultancy work on business plan, things like that in this transitionary period. And then after about a year, Fiona decided to take a sabbatical. And at that point, Independent Dance decided that what it needed was a general manager. So it recruited Gita Wickrell as a general manager. And then when Fiona finally decided last year that she wanted to move on altogether, what the next stage of reorganisation was that Gita and I both became co-directors of Independent Dance. So I, in a way, took on responsibility for all the areas that Fiona had previously been responsible for in terms of artistic programming. Gita's role is more like an executive director, but how we work is very much together rather than artistic director, executive director. We don't divide our titles in that way. And we have an administrator. So our total staffing is 2.5 people, because Gita's 4 days a week, Ella, the administrator, is 4 days a week, and I'm 2.5 days a week. I guess the other organisational history thing to say worth saying is that Jill Clark, the founder, was a very big figure in the British dance scene. Very famous as a dancer, very, very well respected as a really exquisite dancer, and very highly respected as an educator as well. She did make work, I danced in many of her works, but she wasn't as well known as a choreographer. And one of her real interests was in, she was aware that choreographers are the ones that usually get funded, choreographers are the ones whose names are usually known, and so part of her work really had been driven by this, what is the role of the dancer? Making the dancer visible, developing a programme of professional development for the dancer, as well as for makers, and very much seeing that those divisions weren't as clear-cut as they'd been a generation ago, that most of us make sometimes, dance for other people, sometimes dance in our own work, sometimes teach, sometimes, and don't necessarily see those as separate identities, but dimensions of this dance artist identity. So very much that was the original vision and throughout its development. So Jill's respect in the community, and she was given an award by the Queen and very much award-winning status, was part of the identity of independent dance. Jill was part of that identity. I think the other thing to say about ecology, so I mentioned how when the ecology started there had been no open professional classes. That was part of the ecology it stepped into. But over the years, I think what the ecology became was the fact that dancers were no longer necessarily leaving training and going into a company and having a career as a dancer in a company, that people were doing these many different roles, often at the same time, so what people call portfolio careers, that was really very much part of what dancers' experience were done. Whereas training, I think the ecology of independent dance matched Jill's work in the training sphere, where she was she and I worked together in 2000 to write a new degree at Marvin, the one that you came to do. And very much the vision about that was about the fact of developing dance artists who would go and do these many things, rather than training a dancer who would expect to audition, get in a company and do what they were told. So that's part of the ecology, that changing nature of what dancers' lives were becoming. It's part of the ecology in which that independent dance grew up in. Changing ecology. There are now many places in London with open professional class, for example, Greenwich Dance Agency place, Trips Space. So this is very different, lots of places to go and do things, lots of places running workshops, summer schools. There's lots more that people can do. So it's time for independent dance now to step back and go, okay, as the old lady of this, what's our role in this now? What is it? What's the particular thing that we do? And maybe I should come back to what I see that as a little later, but I think that's quite exciting. Rather than, for me, very much it's an opportunity rather than oh no, there's competition. For me, it's an opportunity. Then okay, what's the next thing that needs to happen, and we need to step into that space.
So in a way, actually, we have very similar beginnings, because I think that's the similarity I see between the two organizations, that they're coming out of an artist's response to the need they felt that was present in the ecology. And so Gati's beginnings trace back to 2005, which is pretty much next door, where Anusha used to live. Anusha is the founder director of Gati, and I met her in 2005 in between just after my education at Laban. I was about to join Shobna Jaisingh Dance Company, and I'd come back for the summer, and I met her in a yoga class, and we spent an entire summer sort of exchanging skills in a living room. And over the next couple of years, met in the summer for a couple of months, and in the following year tried to make a little work together as well. And while we were doing that, over these summers, we began to talk about the absolute absence of an ecology for dance, and how by the end of that summer we just spent time smoking cigarettes and drinking lots of coffee, because we said there is actually no point making anything, because there isn't a space. We're in this hot living room with a hard floor. We have no artists to really come and reflect on what we're doing, give us critical feedback. We could be making anything, and have no audience. We're going to have to pull in our friends and family, parents to come and watch us. No funding. So it really felt like it was pointless to begin to make work, and it felt like we needed to somehow build an ecology first before you could even give yourselves the right to be artists. And I think we had those 2 summers where we ranted. That was the time where we only complained. But it was quite clear that we didn't want to spend a lifetime complaining. And you could see that if nothing changed, nothing shifted, you could do that for a lifetime. So then an opportunity came by where Anusha's aunt asked her if she wanted a basement somewhere in Delhi to use it for her rehearsals. And she says, okay, this is the moment that we've been waiting for. Here's a space, and we can begin to imagine what a space like this can do. It was a tiny basement, but what a space like this could do to address all those things we felt were needed to be addressed. So what she began in 2007 was really a series of monthly events, so a workshop or a class once a month, or a discussion, film screening, which brought in practitioners of all kinds. People from the classical dance world, people from studying jazz, people who identified themselves as contemporary dancers, but different kinds of events that could bring in a new set of people or build on a certain set of people. And in the first 2 years, that's all she did, was to organize one event per month. And what those 2 years did was more than skill building, brought in a critical mass of people together. Because really what we missed out then, back then, was this sense of a community. And here a bunch of people, say about 15, 20 people, or let's say about 10, 15 people, began to talk to each other regularly and began to imagine where this field could go and what the needs of the field were. And this is around about the time I moved back from London. It was about 2009 where this groundwork had been done of a critical mass of people coming together. And back then Anusha had also sort of set what we were constructing a website then, and she had imagined what the vision of this organization could be. And there were a few streams that we were looking at almost back in 2009, was creation of new work, new development of new artistic practice, a place for discussion, building a discourse on dance practice in the country, was to look at archiving and documenting practice continuously, because there was an absence of an archive. A platform where people could actually share their practice as far as performances and workshops and classes were concerned. So this was the beginning, so you sort of had a sense of these 4 directions that the organization could take. So from there on we started building from project to project, really responding to what we heard from the field, and over time we had more people from the field joining in to build these projects, and we started with an annual residency, so a choreographer's residency, 10 weeks of creation time, so artists could really just concentrate on making work and not think about sustaining themselves over those 10 weeks at all. And that's one of our oldest projects that have continued every year since. We got a festival going. We felt like we needed to bring the community, the national community together to start building a conversation. Also feel like we had one place where we could all come together and talk about, begin to map this field. In all of this, one thing was quite clear, was that we wanted to not make this distinction between classical contemporary, because I think these binaries were already at play. To reinforce them wasn't what the organization wanted to do at that point, but to actually say that the contemporary cannot be arrived at without engaging with the resources, traditional dance resources of this country, was one thing that was pretty much one of the founding principles of the organization, that you don't want to reinforce these binaries anymore. So the challenge has also been to define contemporary in a largest sense possible, so that you don't zoom in into this being a contemporary dance practice that this organization wants to put forth. The other big challenge was also to keep our own artistic practice, because we were a bunch of people who were practicing artists, to keep our own artistic practice consciously out of the organization. Because at that point we really felt like if it was going to have any kind of community ownership, then you have to keep your own work out of its programming and out of also the way that people recognized the organization's work. That it had to be multiple voices, it had to be many kinds of artists being represented by the organization's work. And that's something that we continued on till now to keep our own work out. Starting with a bunch of practitioners really organizing themselves to carry on a range of projects, we soon found ourselves in a place where we had acquired funding to run these projects. And pretty much unexpectedly, almost like we weren't looking for it, but someone else looked for us, the Royal Norwegian Embassy, saying, oh, we would like to give you an institution grant of 3 years cycles. And suddenly, in a way, our imagination of this space had to shift a little bit, where you felt like you were organizing yourselves in 3-year cycles. So you had to plan yourselves in a way where you were thinking of what's going to happen in the next 3 years, which was very different from how we were doing it earlier, which was quite spontaneously, where you felt like, oh, this year let's do another kind of residency. So that spontaneity suddenly was gone in a way, and I think that shifted in the way that we thought about this work, and it led to a whole lot of burning out. And I think Anusha really burnt herself out simply because you had these projects lined up and you knew that, oh, this year we have to do the residency, it's part of our proposal, we've got to do the festival, the festival's back again. And the scale of the projects grew faster than the people who were running these projects, faster than the kind of money that we could actually bring in for these projects, because the grant that we got was only a seed grant that would cover, say, about 25-30% of what we had proposed in the proposals. So this middle part of the organization's life really became this difficult phase of getting bigger than what you could chew at that time. And in a way now what we have come back to now is reorganizing these projects a little bit. So just very recently, about a couple of months ago, triggered by a financial crisis, I sort of realized that now we have to go back to saying what is essential. Because over the years what had happened was you had about 5 different focus areas: creation, performance, education, research and advocacy, as 5 different ways in which we were looking at addressing the field. And all of these areas were over time developed by people who were working in the organization. Suddenly we realized that a lot of those people have changed. People have moved on, there are new people in here, and it felt like in a way we were carrying the load of people who had been through the organization, and now the organization felt like it was being pulled in 5 different directions. And you had to hire people from the field to run these projects that were imagined by other people. It felt like we really had to shift and consolidate the vision again, to say that this is where we're going to focus from now, and that's the focus of the organization. And it's not going in 5 different directions, but to say that now we're going to work towards setting up an MA in dance practice, and that becomes the central focus of the organization for the next 5 years. And if we are to bring in a festival, if we are to bring in a choreographer's residency, we look at the scale of that from the point of view of this MA. So the MA becomes the frame of the organization.
That really resonates for us because similarly we have Arts Council funding, Arts Council England funding. How we get that, we're too small an organisation to get that independently, and we're not yet a charity. But I think originally the idea was about not becoming a formal organisation, being a movement, being fleet of foot, not being an institution. But as you described, once you start getting funded, once you start getting bigger, there are different kinds of accountability concerns, there are different pressures in terms of now if you're given Arts Council funding, you're expected to be fundraising on top of that, and in Britain it's impossible to fundraise unless you're a charity. So we're in the process of becoming a charity, so that's going to have a whole layer of governance on it that we haven't had to have until now. We've had an artists advisory group, now we're going to have trustees and people on a board and all things like that. So that's a shift that's happening for us now. Definitely, our report, we have to report to the Arts Council in a 5-year cycle, and the demands of reporting are the same for us as they are for big dance companies with multi-million pound budgets, and we have 68,000 a year. Yet we're having to go through the same kind of reporting cycles as much bigger organisations with whole teams of staff. So there is that pressure. Our Arts Council grant comes to us through Siobhan Davis Dance. So we're based in the Siobhan Davis Studios. We're a separate organisation, but they have within their total Arts Council grant is sort of 10 times the amount of hours, but there's this little corner of it which is earmarked by the Arts Council to pass directly to us. So we're not part of their organisation. Until we become a charity, we have to report through their board to the Arts Council, just so that there's that layer of governance in our reporting.
I'm just wondering, I have a question, because we were talking about how in our case we've had to dissociate the organisation from individual practices of people who run the organisation, and we've got to sort of separate these two associations. I'm wondering whether that's been a challenge for you guys in any way.
Well, I know that when it was before my time in my current role, but I remember Fiona telling me that when they moved into the Siobhan Davis Studios, that for many independent dancers, they felt that independent dance had lost their independence because this building had somebody's name on it, and there was another dance company based there. Actually, we were still a separate organisation, but people thought of it as it's Siobhan Davis's building, and you're there. And over the years, I think partly because we're running an MA, and like you, the way the MA has become a centre point of what we do, and some of our other activities are attached to that now. So, for instance, for 2 5-week blocks of the year, the MA students are doing morning class. Therefore, the curation of that morning class is around what the MA students need, but the IB participants are still welcome to come and pay money and join for a day and drop in. The funding of the MA allows us to perhaps attract teachers we wouldn't be able to otherwise, or so the standard of those classes is very, very high, so the attendance is very good in them. It's not that our regular participants lose out because of the MA, the contrary. But it gives definitely the rhythm of the MA has an impact on the rest of our programme and how we design that. So we have this small amount of money that we get from the Arts Council through Siobhan Davis Dance, and then for the MA, Trinity Laban pay us a fee for each module that we deliver. Okay. So it's the MA is a Trinity Laban programme, and we're delivering the 2 core modules of that programme, and they pay us a fee to deliver that programme. And it's a fairly stable fee, but it could go up or down by a couple of thousand depending on the number of students, because things like tutorial hours change depending on how many students you have. The number of hours assessments are going to take changes depending on the number of students you have. So they amend the budget to meet that part. So it's probably might be interesting for you and where you are now to hear about that relationship in terms of we get a fee from Laban, and the budget covers the teaching hours, the tutorial hours, some hours for the people that are going to be on the panel doing the assessment. It covers some organisational development hours, so some hours of Gita's time as executive director, managing that budget, doing all of that. It covers my hours to lead the modules, so not just the time I'm actually teaching, but the curation of those modules and the management of those modules, and a fee for me as what they call lead tutor of that MA. So managing the relationship with lab and attending some meetings there, reporting accountability responsibilities in the HE context. So there's a fee so that my time is bought to do that. However few or many students there are, those things would have to still be done. So there's a fee in the budget for my time for that. Then there's a little bit of a budget line for stationery. There's space hire because we have to hire the space.
And the MA happens at Independent Dance?
So
or does it happen between lab and
between the two. So there's two core modules that Independent Dance deliver, and we curate and teach and manage those, and they happen as intensive blocks. So one happens just after Christmas, so January, the first week of February, a 5-week block, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, and the students are with Independent Dance for that time. Some of that time is self-directed, but they're self-directed in the studio that we hire from Dance. So the MA is, and then the second one, body investigative practice, is just after Easter, and investigative practice we run every second year in partnership with Siobhan Davis Dance. So every second year, investigative practice looks at the processes of making that Siobhan Davis is engaged in. So we do that very much as a partnership module. And she teaches that. I manage it, but it's her practice, and she's teaching, and her dancers contribute. So the MA is a sort of partnership with Trinity Laban, but also with Siobhan Davis Dance. So those two core modules, which are 5 weeks each, happen at Siobhan Davis Studios, led by Independent Dance. But the students do a research methods module with all the other MA students at Laban, and they do that over at Laban, and they do one optional module at Laban, and they choose from a menu what that option will be. And they do a final dissertation project. For most of the students, they choose to do that with me, based around something that they did in one of the core modules, but occasionally someone might have done an option like dance and moving image and become really interested in that, and might have that tutor as a supervisor. So occasionally people might work with a different supervisor for the final project, but often I would be taking that one too. So that's how the time.
That's interesting for us, simply because that's where we're heading towards with the MA. We're going to collaborate with a university based in Delhi, and the partnership is the terms of the partnership aren't clear yet. So sort of we know that we want to keep the course independent in the first. At least in the first run of the course, so that we really have a sense of, we give it a time for incubation. So it doesn't sit under the university's wing, where it's run, where teacher intake, student intake, all of that sits under the university. So that's the kind
because that's where we are now, is the students are a Trinity Laban student, they pay their fees to Trinity Laban, the admissions process is a Trinity Laban admissions process. Though I'm on the selection panel, so we do decide who Independent Dance does decide who comes and who doesn't. But yes, the student it goes through all of that at Trinity Law and pays their fees to them, and then Law just pay us a chunk.
And in the long run, this is the kind of model you want to continue with the MA.
I think in the British context, we'd always have to be validated by, and in that kind of partnership, we wouldn't be entitled to run an MA on our own. We have to be through a higher education institution. We've just signed another 5-year memorandum of collaboration with Trinity Laughlin.
Okay.
So we're sort of registered for the next 5 years under existing conditions. We've run for 5 years now, we're just entering the next 5 years.